Bakugou's man was gorgeous. He was kind, and damn, Irie really wished she'd known that there were alphas out there like him before she'd started dating her awful ex. He was also easily flustered, she realized, as the two of them found their way to a couch. So, you needed suppressants, right? He dug into his bag, pulling out 2 bottles. He looked at her, his bright red eyes full of sincerity. You needed 10 mil, or was it 20 mil? Bakugou asked me to bring 20 mil too, but he sent it later, and I wasn't sure if they were both for you or... The 10 mils are for me, Irie told him. The 20 mils are for... Oh, was it really her place to tell this guy Bakugou's secret? She wasn't sure. Someone else. She finished her statement weakly. Is there someone else here being harassed too? Bakugou's alpha leaned forward, concern coloring his tone. I want to help. He shoved the 20 milligram bottle back into his shoulder bag. But I could start with you. Where's the alpha who's been harassing you? Irie blinked several times. Oh, I think you're confused, she said, then her tongue froze again. Should she tell him? Wasn't it Bakugou's right to tell this guy the truth? But Bakugou was in the parlor, probably being harassed, if not straight up assaulted, at this very second. It wasn't exactly fair to hide the truth from a guy who so clearly wanted to help. How so? The red-haired alpha frowned a little. I'm not the one being harassed, Irie explained carefully. Oh, okay. Well, I guess Bakugou didn't actually tell me who it was. He just asked me to get suppressants for you. The alpha reached up to scratch his head sheepishly, a thoughtful expression crossing his features. Is the Omega being harassed the one I got the second bottle of suppressants for? Oh, Irie could answer this one without endangering Bakugou's secret. Yes, she agreed. They're probably for... Oh, damn, she couldn't use his name. That would be as good as telling him. How the hell? Wait, that's it. She'd used the same method to find his room. It was a neutral enough identifier that it would give nothing important away. They're for the mandatory resident. Cocking his head, the red-haired man frowned a little. There's just the one? Well, I'm not sure, Irie admitted. He's kind of unique, though. Bakugou's alpha considered that for a moment. Unique? Yeah, he's like super buff, and he works out every morning for like 2 hours. Also, he hates the shampoo and stuff here because he says it smells too flowery. Irie described carefully. She didn't want to get too specific, or the alpha might start to suspect the man she was describing was actually Bakugou. Fortunately, it seemed like this guy was an idiot, because he didn't even look remotely suspicious. Huh, weird, he said. I mean, I've met quite a few male Omegas because, well, you know, the gay thing. He blushed a little and rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly before continuing. But most of them are pretty small. At least the ones in heat houses. Maybe because most alphas who come to places like this have a type. I don't know. He said faintly, realizing he was babbling. Sorry. It's fine, Irie assured him. I do think that there's this widespread perception that any buff person must be an alpha. I think it's genetically easier for them to do the bulking up anyway. So there's at least some biological reasoning behind it. But not everyone is like that. Especially not this Omega. And people keep assuming he's an alpha. It's kind of hilarious. He still wasn't getting it. It was almost funny, if it weren't also sad. No wonder Bakugou had never said anything. This guy was painfully oblivious. Oh, really? Huh. And a mandatory resident? Wait. He frowned. If he looks like an alpha, why is he the one getting harassed? Irie gave him a chilling look. Harassment is all about the power trip. What's better than getting one up on a guy who looks like a goddamn alpha but can't lift a finger against you, or he'll risk being sent back here for another mandatory residency. The red-haired alpha leaned back as if he'd been physically struck by this information. "That's disgusting," he said vehemently. He jumped to his feet, looking around the room. "Where is he?" Irie was confused. Who, the alpha or the mandatory resident? "Literally either one," Bakugou's alpha answered, then took a deep breath. "Wait, no. Confrontation can wait. He needs his pills probably. I'll get those delivered first." He looked at Irie. "Do you know where he is? The mandatory resident, I mean." Irie nodded slowly. "He's in the parlor." The red-haired man frowned. "But that's for reserved visitations." His tone darkened as realization crossed his features. "The alpha that's been harassing him is the one in there with him, isn't he?" Irie pinched her lips together. "Probably." She nodded. Red Riot drew himself up to full height. "Well then, I guess I'll just have to crash that party." He turned to face the door, then paused. "Do they let alphas just go to the parlor alone?" Irie considered this for a moment. "I don't think so." He turned to gaze at Irie consideringly. "Would you come with me?" Irie grinned. Absolutely. She would have paid good money for the chance at a front row seat to Bakugou's shocking revelation. Walking this good-looking alpha to the parlor was as much for her benefit as it was to his. Katsuki was doing his damnedest to ignore the way his body was reacting to the man perched in his lap, grinding on him. He'd taken his full suppressant dose, but his body still seemed set on sex, and it apparently did not have the same discriminating taste as Katsuki's mind. He'd shut his eyes as soon as Adachi had crawled into his lap, deciding that if he was going to end up reacting to this shit anyway, he could at least imagine it was Kirishima touching him, and not a fucking creep. Adachi inhaled deeply, right at the base of his neck, by his mating gland. "You still smell like those damn pills," he whined, then chuckled darkly. "You know that can't last for much longer, though. You've only got a day left, and then..." He leaned in, rumbling in Katsuki's ear. "You'll finally be mine." "Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen," came a serious tone, thick with barely restrained anger. "Get the fuck away from my friend." Adachi froze in place. "Who the hell are you?" he hissed. Katsuki kept his eyes closed for a completely different reason now. Of all the ways he'd imagined telling Kirishima the truth, this sure as hell wasn't fucking one of them. Shit. How had he even found Katsuki? He was supposed to be finding Arakaki, not disrupting private sessions in the parlor. "I'm a friend. I'm an alpha, and I requested visitation with him at 9. Check the clock. It's 9 o'clock now." Katsuki felt the weight of Adachi being lifted off his lap, and he fought a sudden urge to clasp his hands over his obviously interested junk. Fuck. Not exactly how he wanted Ichiro to see him. Wanting and lusting over a guy who had just been in the process of grinding on him mere seconds ago. "Unhand me right now." Adachi sounded spitting mad. "This is..." Ichiro didn't seem to pay him any mind. "In Section 14B of the Code of Conduct, it clearly states that an alpha may intervene with mild physical force if an omega appears to be in distress," he informed Adachi in a dangerous tone. "I didn't even hurt you. You've got nothing on me, so fuck off." Katsuki shuddered at the sound of Kirishima's protective tone. It was like drops of water rolling down his spine. Fucking hell, he was so goddamn turned on right now. He cracked an eye open. Ichiro wasn't even looking at him. He was glaring daggers at Adachi, his fists clenched, shoulders heaving with every breath. He looked good like this, though frankly that was probably the arousal talking. Katsuki knew this was simply more evidence of the fact that his fucking suppressants were failing him. But that didn't stop him from appreciating the view of Kirishima from behind, so much so that he opened his other eye. He immediately regretted this when Kirishima turned around. Bakugo, are you alright? He knelt beside Katsuki's seat, concern plainly visible in his features. Been better, Katsuki answered after a moment. He sighed internally. Best to get this over with. You bring my suppressants. Oh. Kirishima fumbled with his shoulder bag. Yeah, here. He dug the bottle out, showing it to Bakugo before tucking it away again. His face reddened. Do you need them now? Bakugo shook his head. Got my regular dose this morning, he answered. Oh, good. Kirishima's shoulder slumped in relief. He eyed Bakugo carefully, then asked, So you're the, mandatory resident? Bakugo sat up slowly and nodded before gesturing to the seat across from him. Sit down, he told Kirishima, and then ask me whatever. Okay. Kirishima sat, leaning forward and gazing earnestly at Katsuki. Why didn't you tell me? Bakugo flinched. Of course this would be the first question, and he still wasn't sure how to answer. Should he tell the truth, or just give Kirishima an easier answer to swallow? I didn't want to deal with the hassle of explaining, he finally said, which had the benefit of being true and an easier answer to swallow. Ichiro didn't seem to buy it, though, his face wrinkling into a confused frown. What's the hassle? He demanded. All you had to say was I'm an Omega. Yeah, but everyone just assumed I was an Alpha. It seemed easier than trying to explain repeatedly. Bakugo replied, even though that wasn't really it. It was because of Ichiro. Ichiro, who wasn't interested in Omegas. But Kirishima struggled for words. You didn't even tell me. He sounded hurt. No, Katsuki answered. I didn't. Are you ashamed? Kirishima asked. Is that why? No, Katsuki growled. There's nothing wrong with being an Omega. Then why did you? Because you never showed any interest in Omegas. Bakugo snapped, leaping to his feet and glaring down at Kirishima. It was always, Omegas don't appeal to me, or they're nice enough but not my cup of tea, or maybe they're okay for some alphas. He grabbed the collar of Kirishima's shirt, lifting him bodily from the chair and shaking him soundly. Do you know how hard it was for me to hear that, knowing that no matter how much I wanted you, you could never want me back? Of course I didn't fucking tell you. Telling you would mean facing the truth that I could never have you. He was breathing hard, his hand still fisted in Kirishima's shirt collar. With a growl, he shoved Ichiro back into his seat, hard, and then pulled back, falling heavily into his own. Fuck. He hadn't meant to be that honest. But, well, it had happened. Too late to worry about that now. Kirishima was staring at him with wide eyes. You've been keeping it from me for all this time, he said softly. Because of what I said. He dropped his head into his hands then. I'm an idiot, he declared, then lifted his eyes to fix his gaze on Bakugou. I've only ever wanted one person, he said. And I thought, well, you never told me otherwise, so I just assumed. I've held back for years, because I thought you were an Alpha, only interested in Omegas. He smiled a little bit. Turns out you were an Omega all along, and I'm still a coward for not saying something sooner. Bakugou frowned suspiciously, sitting up to eye Kirishima warily. That doesn't make sense, he said, because it truly didn't. His mind raced as he pieced together what Kirishima was saying. He hadn't confessed because he thought I liked Omegas. What gave him that impression? Bullshit, he said sharply. I know you're not into Omegas. I'm not into anyone, Ichiro cried, leaning forward. But you. It's always been you, Bakugou. Everyone else pales in comparison. Of course I wasn't interested in other Omegas. I wanted you. Katsuki blinked. This wasn't how he'd expected this conversation to go at all. What do you mean you wanted me? He pounded his chest for emphasis. I wanted you. So basically, you're both idiots, drawled Araki from a few feet away, sounding amused. Katsuki hadn't even realized she was there, but she was standing there and smirking at the two of them. Just kiss already, she urged, making little kissing motions with her hands. Katsuki looked at Kirishima. Kirishima looked back at him. I'm game, Ichiro said weakly. That was all the encouragement Katsuki needed to make his move, crossing the space between them in an instant, fisting Ichiro's collar tightly and pushing his face in so they were nearly nose to nose. This better not be a fucking lie, he snarled. It's not, Ichiro said softly. I didn't say anything because I thought you had a secret Omega lover. Katsuki blinked once, then again. He leaned back slightly. What the fuck? Kirishima shrank back into his chair, eyes wide as he sputtered in frantic explanation. You always came back from rut season smelling like an Omega. Katsuki stared at him for a long moment, then released his collar and took a step back. You're a fucking idiot, he said faintly. You smelled that, and rather than consider that I might be an Omega, your go-to assumption was that I was hiding a secret lover from you. Kirishima shrank back into his seat, looking sheepish. It sounds dumb when you say it like that, he said softly. It is dumb, Katsuki told him, dropping back into his seat and pinching the bridge of his nose. Fucking stupid, even. He sighed then, gazing across at his best friend. I guess it's partially my fault for not telling you, though. Yeah, I wouldn't have assumed that if I'd known you were an Omega, Kirishima yelped, leaning forward suddenly. I trusted you to be honest with me, and you weren't. His eyes flashed with frustration. Yeah, well, you weren't honest with me either, Katsuki grumbled. I thought you couldn't stand Omegas. Uaraka and I get along well, Kirishima protested. But you're not attracted to her, Katsuki shot back. Because I'm freaking gay, Bakugou. Kirishima snarled, leaping to his feet and throwing his hands in the air. I'm interested in men, specifically you. You are the man I'm interested in. Katsuki was on his feet too. Then fucking prove it, he snarled, collaring Ichiro and tugging him in close. With pleasure, Kirishima rumbled, reaching up behind Bakugou's head with one hand and pulling him in for a harsh kiss. It wasn't great, in a technical sense. Their teeth clicked together, and Kirishima's had sharp edges that caught too easily at Bakugou's lips. Their noses mashed together for a moment before Kirishima tilted his head, sighing softly into Bakugou's mouth. His fingers kneaded into the back of Katsuki's neck and then curled around at the side, scraping his blunt nails gently along Katsuki's mating gland. It was like fireworks went off behind Katsuki's eyelids, and he groaned into the kiss, feeling his knees go weak at the sensation. He felt his grip on Kirishima's collar weaken, and he adjusted quickly, wrapping an arm over Ichiro's shoulder instead, trying to hold himself up even as his legs turned to jelly. He was pressed flush against the man he'd been dreaming of for 10 fucking years, and he wanted him, wanted his knot. Ice flooded his veins, and he pulled back, gasping for breath, falling heavily into his chair. He fought for air, unable to find the strength for anything else. Fuck, he finally managed, well aware of how ravaged he'd sounded, despite not having done anything but kiss the man. Kirishima was panting too, pupils blown wide. Holy shit, he gasped. What the hell was that? Bakugou groaned. I don't know, but it could have something to do with the fact that someone fucked with my suppressants, he managed. I've been feeling off for a while now. Damn, Kirishima hissed. Are you in heat? Bakugou shook his head. He knew what his heats were like, and this was nowhere near the level of wanton desperation that plagued him when he went off his suppressants completely. No, just off, he said. I think it's because that fucking asshole was touching me and he lowered my dosage, so it's causing some fucked up reaction. But the suppressants are still holding back my heat. Kirishima's eyes glinted with fury, his countenance darkening. He touched you. He growled, his voice guttural in a way that tingled along Katsuki's spine pleasantly. Arching in his seat, Katsuki tried to muffle the whine that escaped his lips, throwing a hand over his mouth to lock it in. It didn't really work, since he was still physically responding to the sound of Kirishima's voice. Shit, he gasped, dropping his hand, and then, fuck. Because one expletive just hadn't been enough to express his current state. Bakugou. Kirishima was hovering over him now, hands fluttering anxiously. Are you all right? Not really, Katsuki answered honestly. I'm kind of fucking desperate. And he was. This wasn't how he wanted to tell Kirishima that he was an Omega, and Kirishima definitely wasn't reacting the way he'd expected. But hell, if he wasn't wanting Kirishima, especially now that he knew Kirishima was interested too. Or at least interested enough to kiss with a passion that made Katsuki's knees go weak. Though technically, that had been the mating gland teasing. Fuck Adachi for that. He'd never been sensitive there before. Ichiro's eyes widened in surprise, and he stooped low to hear Katsuki better. What do you mean, desperate? He asked, still surprisingly dense even after seeing Katsuki panting and half-hard in his black jeans. Desperate for what? Fucking hell. Was it going to need to be that specific? With a tremendous effort, Bakugou sat up, reaching out and grabbing Kirishima by the shoulder. For you, asshole. Things were moving way too fast, and Ichiro had no idea what was going on anymore. They had gone up to the parlor, and it was only when they were halfway there that he'd remembered he had been trying to avoid the parlor because Bakugou was in there. He'd ended up frozen, standing outside the parlor, and Arakaki had looked at him in confusion. He's in here, she'd said. I know, he'd replied awkwardly. But so is Bakugou, and He'd felt his face turn red. I don't want to see him with someone else. Arakaki had eyed him for a long moment, a thoughtful expression crossing her features. Do you like him, big guy? Ichiro had choked on his inhale, sputtering frantically. I don't know. I mean, he's good looking, I guess, and... Hey. Arakaki had interrupted him in a sharp tone. If you like him, who cares what guy is with him? Just go tell him how you feel. Don't be a baby about it. You're a grown-ass adult. Start acting like it. Kirishima had protested. But what about the mandatory resident? And the Omega girl had looked ready to throttle him. Just go talk to him. She'd snarled in a tone that left no room for argument. In the face of that intensity, Kirishima had chosen to simply bob his head nervously and head across the floor. What had looked like almost innocent cuddling from across the room had begun to take on a different tone as he'd gotten closer. Bakugou's face had been slack, and he hadn't seemed to be responding much, if at all, to the man perched on his lap. The man had been all over Bakugou, but he hadn't looked like he'd been enjoying the proximity, at least not in a meaningful way. He'd had almost a predatory gleam in his eye, with a cruel twist to his lips. As Kirishima had drawn closer, he could finally hear what the man was crooning in Bakugou's ear, and it had sent a spike of fury through him. You still smell like those damn pills, the man had said, and a mirthless chuckle had burst past his lips before he'd moved in to nibble at Bakugou's throat again. You know that can't last for much longer, though, he'd said moments later, his lips practically brushing Bakugou's earlobe. You've only got a day left, and then... You'll finally be mine. Realization had come crashing down on Kirishima in that moment. The mandatory resident he was looking for, the one who'd been harassed by an alpha, whose suppressants he was carrying. That mandatory resident was Bakugou. He'd jumped in immediately, lying about having a reserved visitation to get the disgusting alpha away from his friend. Glad he'd read the paperwork carefully upon entry, since he now knew exactly what he could do in this place without the risk of getting kicked out. Because there was no way in hell he was going to risk getting kicked out when he knew that Bakugou had no legal recourse in this place but to sit back and just take whatever an alpha felt like doing to him. Once he chased off the sicko, he'd knelt by Bakugou, and Bakugou had immediately confirmed his suspicions by asking about the suppressants. Despite all the evidence pointing to it, somehow Kirishima had still wanted to be wrong. He hadn't wanted to know that Bakugou had been here, harassed, with no one to stand beside him while he'd endured staying in a place where he hadn't wanted to be. Kirishima had felt as though his chest would split open. The pain felt so real. He kicked himself mentally, realizing that he had been in the parlor earlier, and his cowardice had kept him from stepping in when Bakugou had needed him. And now, after a convoluted conversation, here they were. Bakugou was gripping his shoulder in a death grip, face flushed red with what was probably half fury and half shame, pupils blown wide. He was breathing heavily, a thin sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. Ichiro glanced down at Bakugou's hand and frowned, noticing his knuckles. They were bandaged for some reason. Distractedly, he'd reached out and lifted Bakugou's hand away from his shoulder, gently brushing his fingers over the bandages. "What happened?" he asked, knowing it couldn't be a training injury. Bakugou was always careful to tape up before he took to the punching bags, and he hasn't seen any sort of fitness facility here at all, much less one that was equipped for combat training. "It's nothing," Bakugou snapped, trying to tug his hand from Kirishima's grasp. Ichiro didn't let go, frowning. "Why did this happen?" he asked, holding tight to Bakugou's hand. "Who made you do this?" "No one made me do anything," Bakugou snarled. "I just fucking punched the wall a few times. It's nothing." "But why?" Ichiro pressed, looking away from the hand clutched in his grasp to meet Bakugou's gaze. "Why would you do that? You know better." "I was fucking pissed, okay?" Bakugou snarled, finally ripping his hand out of Ichiro's grip. "It's not a big deal." "Why were you upset?" Ichiro pressed, leaning forward. With a snarl, Bakugou shoved his shoulders, pushing him back towards his chair. "None of your goddamn business," he snarled, his face reddening, and just like that, Ichiro knew. It was that alpha, wasn't it? Ichiro could feel his blood pressure rise as he realized that jerk had made Bakugou so upset he'd torn up his knuckles, potching a solid wall. "What did he do?" "Nothing," Bakugou snapped, but he curled in on himself in a way that was so un-Bakugou-like that it physically pained Ichiro to see it. "He definitely did something. I just don't know what." Irie chimed in, causing both men to look at her with twin looks of surprise. "What?" she demanded. "I walked here with you. Where else was I going to go? I deserve to see some resolution to this whole will they, won't they thing." With one accord, Bakugou and Ichiro silently chose to ignore her, turning back to face each other once more. "Bakugou," Ichiro said, catching the other's hands with his own. "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner." "Don't be sorry." Bakugou ducked his head with a growl, unable to meet Ichiro's gaze. "I said it wasn't necessary, so don't feel like shit just because you believed me when I said so." Regardless of what Bakugou said, Ichiro wanted to feel shitty, but feeling bad wasn't going to change what happened or make anything better. "Okay," he agreed, his voice soft, rubbing his thumbs gently over Bakugou's battered knuckles. His friend's hands trembled in his grip, and Bakugou inhaled sharply. "Fuck," he breathed, shutting his eyes briefly. "Damn it, Kirishima, do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" Ichiro frowned in confusion. No, what?
God damn it. You're such an idiot. Why do I put up with you, I swear?
Bakugou snapped, squeezing his eyes tighter.
You're fucking touching me, and it's real fucking nice. It's real good, okay?
Ichiro didn't understand why making Bakugou feel better was such a bad thing. He was even less clear on why that made him an idiot. Wait, so do you not want me to touch you? A sudden thought raced through his mind that the last alpha touching him had probably been very invasive, and shit, he should have asked Bakugou before touching him. He started to let go and Bakugou whined.
Don't stop.
He snapped, then stiffened, his crimson eyes darting from side to side, pointedly not making contact with Ichiro's gaze.
Or do, because it's fine, whatever you want.
I want what you want, Kirishima insisted hotly. So just tell me what you want.
Holy fucking shit,
Bakugou breathed.
Are you trying to get me painfully aroused? Because that's what's happening right now. And if you're not going to take responsibility, then fucking stop.
Ichiro froze. What? He glanced closely at Bakugou, his eyes taking in signs that he'd seen but hadn't really pieced together just yet. Flushed, heavy breathing, trembling. Oh yeah, and a sizable bulge in his pants. Holy shit, Bakugou was seriously turned on. But Kirishima hadn't even been doing anything. He'd just been holding his hands. Nobody got turned on from hand-holding. Did they? What was the right response here? This was weird. Bakugou was probably going into heat after all and just didn't realize that's what was happening.
Fuck, Kirishima.
Bakugou tipped his head back and groaned in a throaty voice that sent shivers of pleasure cascading down Ichiro's spine.
Are you going to fuck me or not? Because if you are, I'd like you to do it now.
His eyes flew open, and he gazed into Ichiro's, a challenge in his expression.
And if you're not, then you need to stop fucking touching me before I lose my shit. Or, come in my fucking underwear.
Oh. Ichiro paused, realizing he'd begun to absently run his thumbs over Bakugou's bandaged knuckles again. But I thought you needed suppressants. He really didn't think it was a good idea to just mate someone who might be in heat. Heat was an altered state. Bakugou might think he was into Kirishima now, and then realize later he'd made a big mistake. Kirishima wasn't sure he'd be able to handle the fallout from something like that. It would break him.
You brought the suppressants here, yeah?
Bakugou's eyes were locked on him, his gaze hungry.
So I'll be fine then. I'm not in heat now, and with what you brought I'll have enough to last me the rest of my time here.
He grunted, leaning forward to look Ichiro in the eye.
I just really, really need to have sex. Right now.
Behind them, Arakaki cleared her throat. You might want to go to your room for that, she suggested in a bright tone. Not that I'm sure there wouldn't be a fair number of people who would enjoy the show, but you two don't strike me as the exhibitionist sort. Bakugou sighed heavily, his gaze turning from Kirishima to rest on the brown-haired young woman.
Oi, sundress girl.
Arakaki beamed back at him, totally unashamed. Yes, Bakugou?
Fuck off.
It took surprisingly little convincing to drag Kirishima out of the parlor and down the hall towards Katsuki's shitty little room. It wasn't until he'd kicked the door open and pulled Kirishima inside that he reconsidered this decision. The red-haired alpha stumbled to a halt, his eyes taking in a fist-sized hole that Katsuki had put in the wall the night before, along with the dark brown smears that had been left behind by his bleeding knuckles. Oh my god, Kirishima said weakly. Seriously, Bakugou, can we talk about this? He gestured to the wall. Shit went down, and I'm really worried about you.
Sex now, worry later,
Katsuki told him, peeling off his jacket. Kirishima made a distressed noise. I don't know if that's a good idea, Bakugou.
What the hell are you talking about? It's a magnificent idea. Now take off your fucking clothes.
Katsuki insisted, pulling off his shirt and sparing a moment to glower at Kirishima, who was still fully dressed. I mean it, Kirishima snapped, grabbing Katsuki's wrist and gripping them firmly. Just wait a minute. Fucking bullshit. He'd spent 10 goddamn years filling out paperwork because he couldn't fucking get over his best friend. And now that said friend had claimed to genuinely and honestly find him attractive too. He wanted to fucking wait. No. Bakugou was fucking done being told what to do. If Kirishima was telling the truth and he was really interested in Bakugou, then he would fucking take off his clothes and bury that knot as deep as he could get it in Katsuki's ass. And he would do it right that fucking second.
I'm not waiting,
Katsuki snarled, using his wrist to force the alpha a few steps back.
Either get in my bed or get out.
Let's talk about this, Kirishima yelped. I just want you to be sure that this isn't some sort of, I don't know, heat thing or something you're doing because of what some creepy alpha did to you while you were in here. You tore up your bare knuckles on a wall, Bakugou. I think I've earned the right to be a little concerned about that. God damn it, how many times was Katsuki going to be repeating himself?
We could talk about that shit later, Rocks for Brains. Right now I just want to have sex.
He shoved hard enough that the backs of Kirishima's knees hit the edge of the bed and he tumbled backwards. His tight grip on Katsuki's wrist meant that he was pulled down too, and the two of them landed heavily, Kirishima on the bed and Katsuki on Kirishima. Are you sure you really want this? Kirishima yelped. I just think we should think about this. Katsuki was going to rip his damn head off.
Are you fucking serious?
He roared.
I've been thinking about this for 10 fucking years.
Kirishima stilled beneath him. What?
Why the fuck do you think I filled out deferred mating paperwork for so many years that I got slated for mandatory residence? Do you really think it's because I couldn't have found an alpha to fuck if I goddamn wanted one?
Katsuki wanted to use his quirk so bad he could practically taste the nitroglycerin smoke in his mouth. He just wanted to explode something. He was so furious.
I didn't want an alpha. I wanted you. I was waiting for you, you dumb shit. Waiting for you to pull your rock-hard head out of your shitty ass and fucking notice me.
He was panting hard as he lifted his hands and planted them on either side of Kirishima's face. The man below him was still clutching his wrists, but he didn't seem to be exerting much pressure at this point. It seemed more like he was holding on to them because he didn't know where else to put his hands.
And now that I know you've wanted me just as much as I've wanted you, for all this time, you have the gall to tell me to fucking think about it?
Katsuki thundered, his voice shaking the walls.
I don't need to think. I've been thinking about you for an entire decade. Just shut up and fucking do me, you asshole.